Hello, this is Frank Thier, and this is my M9 explanation video where I'll be talking about graphical user interfaces. I'd like to apologize ahead of time. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so my voice might sound a little bit different than it usually does. Maybe a little bit harder to understand, so I'll try to speak up. So first, let's talk about what a GUI widget is. So a widget is simply an element of interaction within the interface. So for example, we have a J button or a J text area. I've already run this code and I'll explain it all in a second, but we have these buttons which are elements of interaction because you can click on them and have certain things happen. And then also this text area, the user is interacting with it or reading it. We can change the color of it. And so these are just two examples of widgets. It's just an element of interaction within the interface. We can change the color using this set foreground method here. So because JTextArea and JButton both extend JComponent, there's this set foreground method in JComponent, and it allows us to pass in, I've just used the constant blue here from the color class. You can create an instance of color and change it if you want, but I was just using this for simplicity. And it allows us to set the foreground, which is the actual color of the text, to blue. We could also set the background using set background. You can do anything you want with that. So that's how you change the color. Changing the font is also as easy as just using the set font method. We're creating a new instance of font because I want to use the Broadway font. Plain is just a style, and then 20 is the size. We can see from the constructor here. So you just give it a name, a style, and a size. And using the set font method, we have set the font of our text area text to this Broadway, which I think looks kind of cool. So this is the flow layout manager, and as you can see here, it just kind of lays things out in this flow of directional flow. And so just to clarify, I've just copied this straight from the code. This is explaining what flow layout is. So flow layout arranges components in a directional flow, much like lines of text in a paragraph. And that's what we can see here from left to right. This is just a line of text, and we can create another line, or we could reverse it to go right to left if we wanted to, but we don't really, I don't care so much about doing that right now. So we can just see here that we go from left to right, and it lays out components as you add them. So because we added all the buttons first and then we added the text area, that's why we have 10 buttons and then the text area. Next, let's talk about the grid layout. Let me pull up my grid layout example here, which is really cool. So we've set the layout to grid layout, and again, this is just from the grid layout class. It says that the grid layout class is a layout manager that lays out the container's components in a rectangular grid. The container is divided into equal sized rectangles, and one component is placed in each rectangle. And so we are going to specify that we want 4 rows, 6 columns, and then a gap of 5 pixels horizontally and vertically. And so that is what we get exactly right here. We have 4 rows of buttons and 6 columns of buttons. I've just used this for loop to add the 24 buttons, and we can see here that this is the grid layout and this is the flow layout side by side. So this is the directional flow. Oops. And then this is the grid. That's the difference. Next, let's talk about border layout. So border layout, again, is a little bit different where again, I just copied this straight from the code. The border layout lays out a container arranging and resizing its components to fit in 5 regions. So instead of a flow or a grid, we have these 5 regions: north, south, east, west, and center. And so we can see here that I just created 5 new buttons, and I specified I wanted them north, center, south, east, west using these border layout constants. And we can see here that our north button, south button, east, west, and center are all placed in their respective regions. So that is the border layout in contrast to grid layout and in contrast to flow layout. Next, let's talk about event handling. So I've just created this simple event handler here, where we have simply one J button and one J slider. J slider is another example of a widget, just a different type of interactivity with the user. And so the GUI button is just an instance of this GUI button class. It, of course, has to extend JButton. It's just going to change its text and not do anything else. And we also had to create a GUI button listener because we have to create an action listener to add to this button, which is done right here. So we have the instance of button, and we add the action listener using this method. And of course, we create a new instance of GUI button, which passes in our parameters. And so that is what actually ties the action listener to the JButton. And before I click it, we've coded it. So whenever you implement action listener, you of course have to specify this action performed method, which tells the program what to do when you interact with that component. And so we're interacting with this JButton, and so upon the click of the JButton, we want to change the text, we want to disable the button, and then we are going to interact with a different widget, which I'll explain in a second, and then have a little pop-up. And so let me click on our button here, and we can see exactly what happens. So our text changed, our button became disabled, and we had this little pop-up that says this event has been handled, which is kind of cool. And so as I was beginning to explain, we also, so this is explaining how to change the state of a widget based on an event triggered by a different widget. So our button widget here is the one doing an action, performing an action, but it's also changing the state of a different widget of the slider, which is kind of cool. And it's pretty easy to do because all you have to specify is that in this action performed method of the JButton, we just grab the instance of the slider and we can use its methods to affect its state. And so we just call this setValue method, and we pass in a 0 because our slider is just as simple as a 0 or a 1. And we can see, originally it was set to value 1, and upon clicking the button, we just changed the value to 0, and that is why it went from up here to down here when we click the button. Let me do that one more time just so we can see again. And so, of course, when I click the button, our text will change, the button disables, and we saw our slider go from 1 to 0. So that is the example of affecting a widget from a different widget, and both of those are examples of adding interactivity to widgets through event handling. This has been my M9 explanation video on graphical user interfaces. I hope you've learned something. If you have any questions, please leave a comment, and thank you for watching.